Welcome back to Cruising. My name is Sarah Gabrielli, and I have such a special guest to share with you today. She is an iconic Black lesbian feminist, scholar, author, and activist, most known for the Combahee River Collective, which was a group of Black socialist lesbian feminists, which she founded with her twin sister Beverly and their friend Demita Frazier. All three of the founders were queer women, and they went on to publish the Combahee River Collective Statement, which you might have heard of, in 1977. The statement became an essential political text for Black feminism and for just intersectional politics as a whole. We're going to talk about this. Actually, we get to it in the second half of the interview, but I want to kind of set the stage for how groundbreaking Barbara's politics were back in 1977 when the Combahee River Collective Statement came out. Sort of the main idea of what they're saying is that oppression is intersectional, and specifically for Black women, they face oppression in the forms of racism, sexism, classism. And their point is that Black women have a right and need for their own politics, their own groups for issues facing Black women. They articulate that, like, the feminist movement was focused on white women, the civil rights movement is focused on Black men. At the time, it's a very big deal for this kind of thing to be articulated. And it's also groundbreaking in being explicitly anti-capitalist, explicitly socialist. It's still super relevant today, referenced constantly, notably by some of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. They've come out and said that the Combahee River Collective Statement has been important in shaping their politics and the politics of BLM. So for all of these reasons, I was perhaps more nervous to interview Barbara than I've ever been for any other interview on this podcast. Like, clearly, she's extremely intelligent and worldly, and I wanted to make sure that I could at least try to engage with her on an intellectual level that wouldn't be a waste of her time. So I did an exorbitant amount of studying up on her, as one always should, of course. But the sweetest, most comforting thing happened the morning of the interview, which was that Barbara started listening to Cruising. And so as Rachel and I drove up to her home in Albany, the text from Barbara came flooding in. She was loving it, loved the storytelling, kicking herself for not binging it all sooner. When we got there, she kept the compliments coming. And she even said that she gets a lot of interview requests, and it was like really rare for her to say yes, but this sounded like it would be fun. And we did have fun. We ended up talking for like 3 whole hours. As Barbara will fully admit herself, she enjoys a tangent or two, but always gets back to her point eventually. And so this, of course, is an abridged version of that conversation.
I always say I was a practicing heterosexual in the early 1970s, and I never got it right. I was a practicing heterosexual. Yeah. So I was with this guy for a couple of years. Yeah. And, it was kind of like the young, gifted, and Black cohort, living in Boston, around the Northeast, because I went to what we now call a 7-sibling school, but in those days it was a 7-sister school. And, he had gone to Dartmouth, one of the exclusive men's colleges. He was Black. And then, friends who had gone to similarly good white schools. We would get together, we'd have dinner parties. And like, when I would go to these dinner parties, if I wasn't the person who was hosting the party, the women would be in the kitchen. Now, these are Black women with degrees, all kinds of degrees, all kinds of expertise. Whether they had degrees or not, they were like hella smart, right? Yeah. And so the thing is, like, they're in the kitchen and the guys are out in the living room. And where would I be? I'd be out in the living room with the guys because I wanted to hear what they were talking about. Yeah. And I said, look, why is there this thing going on, this demarcation, And I will tell you this little anecdote.
Okay, I love it.
This little anecdote was when I was with the man for a couple of years. Pretty nice, actually. Pretty nice guy.
Must have been if you're with him.
Very talented. One of the things I loved is that he played blues guitar.
That's
he
hot.
actually knew how to play blues guitar. But anyway, one night, after having been in bed with him, I get up, I'm going to the bathroom, and what I'm thinking is like, now all I need is a good woman. I had that thought. And I said, oh, no. Just imagine, that I had that
just
thought.
kind of crossed your mind.
Yes,
and you're like,
yes. I said, oh, now all I need is a good woman.
So where did those lesbian feelings start for you?
They started when I was a teenager.
Really? What do you remember about it?
Oh, God. Do you really want to know?
Of course I want to know.
It's not pleasant. It was very upsetting and very scary, Of course, when you enter puberty, you begin to have sexual feelings. I think that must happen for everybody, or most anyway, for most people. Mm-hmm. And so I was excited about, getting my period, which I know is like...
I was too. I was late to get it. So I was like, let me join the club.
Right. And the reason I was excited about it is because it meant that I was growing up, I think. It was more, it wasn't so much about sexuality, although that was very interesting and mysterious, but it was more about like, okay, so I'm going to be in another stage of life where maybe I'm going to have more autonomy and get to say more about what I want to do versus what I'm being told to do, because I was being told to do plenty, in my partially traditional Black home. I had both unconventional and traditional. We were orphans, essentially, because our mother died when we were 9 years old, and we never had any contact with our father. Our father's family.
And you're twins,
We are twins.
And so you're raised by your sort of extended family of Black women, that kind of Southern identifying.
They're all from Georgia.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't Southern identifying.
Yeah.
They were Southern.
I guess, they're literally Southern.
They're literal.
I read something about when they referred to home, it was like, that was Georgia.
My grandmother.
Yeah.
That was always, home was Georgia.
Yeah.
We had a 2-family house. My aunt had been married, and our mother, her sister, died in 1956. She died the same year that my aunt and her husband separated, which is just like, how can one woman endure so much loss and so much pain and never be bitter?
Really?
She was one of the nicest people you could ever meet. So sweet, so pleasant, so not mean. She continued to be vibrant, incredibly loving, toward us, a killer sense of humor, so culturally alive,
But we're getting to lesbian feelings.
Yes.
Somewhere
you're going to get there.
Okay,
you're going to get there.
I have to just trust.
Yes. Do trust. A dear friend of mine says, Barbara always digresses and she always gets back to the point. Always.
Okay.
So, as I said, not that really interested in boys, totally focused on excelling in school, loving everything about school, and having a family that they created that self-fulfilling prophecy. So, I mean, there's no way you could have lived in my house and not ended up loving school. And shame on you. And God forbid if you didn't love school, because then there probably would have been conversations. But
then she wouldn't have been so nice.
Yeah, but our aunt was not. It was our grandmother who was about all that. But the thing is, our aunt was not our disciplinarian per se. I was growing up in the 50s and the 60s. So in my day, girls in junior high did not date. Middle school girls did not date. And a lot of high school students didn't date either. Nobody was really like watching a clock like, when are you going to bring a boyfriend home? Or nobody even asked that.
Right.
They had no interest in that.
Which for a young lesbian, that's a gift.
It is. I mean, they just thought we were doing what we needed to do, and I would have these screaming nightmares about being sexual with women as a teenager.
Oh my gosh.
Screaming nightmares. And the thing is, my grandmother wake up and my grandmother is standing there,
And you're like, does she know?
Yeah.
That's scary.
And that was really, that was quite a bit. Black women were universally assumed to be sluts and to be whores when I was growing up. That was across the board. It did not make any difference who you were, how you conducted yourself, how uptight you were, how proper you were. Didn't make any difference. We were all considered to be that. And that's a big insane burden on a young person or any person's mind. Now, I had a friend, my sister and I, we shared friends when we were growing up. But once when she was joking, she said, you two are lesbos. She said, you're lesbos. And it's like, what's that? Why is she saying that?
How old do you think you were?
I would say junior high, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know why she said
12, it. 13. So you didn't know what it meant when she first said it?
I think I knew what it meant.
Oh, you could tell.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, the thing is, because my sister and I read everything, we knew more stuff than you might expect.
Yeah.
Because we certainly knew what a homosexual was. My aunt, incredibly visionary aunt, she had a friend whose son was gay. And so she would tell us about, Elizabeth's son is gay and he's an artist and he does this and he does that. I think he was a dancer, actually. And the thing is, it was all kind of matter of fact. It was not condemning or mean. It was just like facts.
I mean, that's meaningful at that time.
It was kind of like, this is Elizabeth's son. There's no way I'll say anything bad about him. I don't know what Elizabeth thought about having a gay son. Our aunt LaRue always told us the truth about things. She never really covered over or tried to make things prettier or less complex than they were. I mean, I feel like she made me the person I am.
Yeah.
I never had a chance to thank my aunt for anything.
Really?
She died 2 years after I finished college, suddenly. So I never had a chance to say, number one, Aunt LaRue, I'm so sorry. I was such a jerk. I'm so sorry. And then number two, thank you for everything. I never would have been able to do any of it without you. So I've kind of spent my life trying to pay back, and give back.
I mean, was she very outwardly political? Like, I'm so interested in how you and Beverly both kind of ended up being some of the greatest political minds of your generation. I mean, eventually you're coming up with...
That's kind of hilarious.
You're eventually coming, like, sort of articulating political theory that had never been articulated before. And that's a huge deal. You have to know that about yourself.
From your lips.
How do you feel like your upbringing sort of shaped that? Or do you, I'm imagining.
Well, I think I can attribute things. One of the things is that our family had really good values. I always say, well, the people in my family, they were genuine Christians. They actually followed what it said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Generosity, the charity, the kindness, all those things. I wasn't raised with gender stereotypes.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Which is amazing.
Yeah. I was raised around being appropriate and, dressing nicely, talking in a well-modulated voice or whatever, some of those things. But I mean, I was surrounded by just a lot of women role models who made you feel like, women can do everything and I'm watching them do it. And when you think about what they had gone through, my grandmother was born in the 1880s. I had 3 great aunts. So it's like 4 people from the 19th century because my aunt was born in 1914. So the previous generation had to be born in the 1800s,
right, of course.
So that's who I was surrounded by.
But they weren't all living in that house, were they?
One of our great aunts lived with us. Not everybody lived in the house, but our families were very close.
Yeah.
It's the way that Black people lived during that historical period. Extended families and trying to help each other. Because, of course, the white power structure, racial capitalism wasn't hiring Black people to do almost anything in the United States except for menial jobs. They were what everyone from that era and other eras would call race women. People talked in those days, and this would go back probably to the early 1900s, they would talk about, well, he's a race man. He's a race man. Oh, she's really a race woman. Now, what that meant is that they were people who were committed to the struggle of and the better opportunities for the whole group. They weren't just out for self. So a race man or a race woman, they knew that they were a part of an oppressed community and that they had a responsibility to pull together with everybody who was in the same situation. A lot of people don't have that now. They don't understand that. They think that, I'm going to be like the biggest movie star. I'm going to be the biggest hip hop artist. I'm going to be the biggest this, the biggest that. They don't understand. And they actually think that the reason they got to do that is because they're exceptional. It's like, are you kidding? And like for me, I got to go to one of the most competitive colleges in the country. Was it because I was all that? Well, Yeah, I had some good grades, and I did very well on standardized tests. Both my sister and I did, whatever. But the bottom line was our family gave that to us. Mm-hmm. They gave us a great love and passion for learning and for education. And then there was a little thing called the civil rights struggle.
Right.
And had it not been for the civil rights struggle, I never would have gone to Mount Holyoke.
Of course.
Never.
Never would have been able
And neither would my sister have gone to the University of Chicago.
Yeah.
It would not have happened. The church that I was raised in was a very progressive, socially conscious church with a minister who was a civic leader in the city of Cleveland. To have a minister who was speaking out to the power structure in Cleveland at the time, both pre, during, and as the civil rights movement unfolded. Yeah. Anybody who was alive and who was a part of the Black diaspora, the African diaspora in the United States in the late 19th century into the early 20th century probably had a fairly profound racial consciousness because you couldn't escape from it.
Yeah.
I mean, the Scottsboro Boys, the lynchings. My family was in Georgia during the time of mass lynchings, massive numbers of lynchings. I found out just last year through doing research for a speech that I needed to prepare that there was a race riot, an actual race riot in the little town where my family resided.
Wow.
I never knew that because they have been gone for so many decades.
Yeah.
And so reading about the race riot, where people were killed and churches were burned and people were burned alive inside of churches that were burning, reading about all that, and this is all right around where they lived, so they would have known about it. One of the things it talked about is that the Black men of the community went out to defend the community with guns, and they were armed. And I'm thinking, wow, I know nothing about my grandfather, but I'm wondering, I said, I wonder, was my grandfather one of those men who went out with a gun?
Wow.
Quite likely.
Yeah.
Quite likely, you know.
In this small town.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As I said, they were really alert to the civil rights movement, but what they did every day is that they took care of us and went to work. Yeah. They didn't have time for meetings. Our grandmother, on the other hand, was a part of the block club for the street that we lived on, like a neighborhood association. And she also worked at the polls during elections. It's like, and we had no idea. I mean,
you didn't know she was doing it at the time?
She was doing that in Cleveland.
Yeah. But you're saying you had no idea.
Yeah, because we were too little to understand.
Yeah.
And they were about voting. They were about voting. Yeah. Because guess what? They had come from Dublin, Georgia, where they could not vote.
Right. What do you think about voting?
I vote. I vote every election that comes. Yeah. When I ran for office, one of the things they do when you run for office is they check your voting record. When they did that for me, it turned out I was what was called a prime voter.
Oh, nice.
I was a prime voter.
Yeah.
Not because I thought I was going to run for office, but because I see voting as a sacred trust coming out of my family's and the racist history. Yeah. People died for the right to vote. When I was in junior high school, elementary school, college, most Black people in the United States could not vote. I mean, people in the northern and western cities could, but not in the deep South. That's what a lot of the civil rights movement was about. That's why there's a Voting Rights Act.
Yeah.
I've had this conversation with people often, people who I share identities in politics with, socialists, lesbian, feminists. So it's not like we have nothing in common.
Yeah.
But the thing is that some people don't really see a value in voting. My feeling is what's on the ballot as far as ballot initiatives and propositions. But we were talking about the terrifying dreams that I had, nightmares. Yeah. So we might want to follow that as a through line to how did I get to the point that I could come out to my friend Jenny Burson.
And it was in the back of your mind.
Oh, no, it was in the back of my mind. It was eating away at me. Oh, I had to say something. You've heard me talk about my family. And so what I was grappling with then in my 20s, during that time was how can I become something that goes against their aspirations and their dreams for what kind of person I'm going to be. Because in those days, let's face it, we're talking about a few years after Stonewall. You were a criminal, you were a sinner, of course, according to almost any organized religion, or you were mentally ill. Mm-hmm. None of these things are terrific. And in our community, in the Black community, you were lowlife. You know, if you were stealing, if you were violent, if you didn't take care of your children, whatever, then you were lowlife. And one way of being lowlife was to be queer. And that was very hard for me to put together. One of my friends from college who was in the class after mine, she came out as a lesbian. When we talk about our college years, you thought, oh my God, we were at a women's college. We were all young. Right. I mean, we just wasted a lot of time. In the summer of 67, after my sophomore year, I decided that I was going to transfer out of Mount Holyoke and go to the new school. Guess what Mount Holyoke did? Mount Holyoke called up my aunt at work. He called her up at work.
That's crazy.
To try to get me to
I mean,
they wanted her
you're an adult at that point.
But the thing is, see, they didn't want to lose Black students. They had a really high attrition rate of Black students. Very few Black students had graduated from Mount Holyoke at that time.
And why is that?
Because of the fact that the social conditions of being in an all-white, elite, ruling class space was just a little bit too much for most Black kids to take. We were kids. My first year, there were no seniors, no Black seniors, as in zero. So does that make you think you can graduate if there are no seniors?
No, of course not.
Okay. The underlying reason for why I left Mount Holyoke is that the person who I was really in love with, seriously, you know, but very unspoken, very unspoken, she spent her junior year in India.
Oh, so.
And so I'm
what
thinking,
are you going to stay around there for?
How the hell am I going to get through another year at Mount Holyoke?
Yeah,
and
no.
she's not here.
Yeah.
And then guess what? She comes back senior year. And I said, I guess I could go back.
That's why you went back your senior year. Oh my God. I mean, I literally get it. I would do anything.
And also
for
because
love.
I wanted my Mount Holyoke degree.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I didn't, the whole thing.
So what were you telling yourself in your head about your love for this person?
I knew that there was nothing I could do about it. I was sexually attracted to her. I was in love with her, you know, but there was nothing I could do about it. Yeah, I had other crushes, but I was truly.
But all you could do was like try to be around her, basically.
And that's what I did.
Yeah. No, totally. So
my misbegotten life. Oh my God, it's so misbegotten.
No, I mean, I get it. So then what was it like for you? Because you were already politically involved.
Very.
But you haven't, like, I would say, found your political home where you feel like, okay, this group is all aligned with my politics.
Well, my political home during that period would have been Black feminism, but I got involved in political organizing as a teenager in Cleveland. Right. I was involved in the civil rights struggle. Yeah, well, the boycott and working in CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. I was in Chicago in 68 for the Chicago Convention. Demonstrations, which was no joke, as you are very well aware. I don't know if I was radicalized, by that, but when I went back to Mount Holyoke, I was like, I've been on the streets of Chicago. There's really very little you could show me here on this little campus that would make me feel intimidated or that I didn't have a right to do things. Mount Holyoke has houses that are cultural houses for different student constituencies. The first of the houses, we founded it as the Afro-American Society's house.
You founded it while you were there?
Yes, and sat in the administration building for it and negotiated with the college.
When you say sat in, you mean
as in sat in the administration building on a particular Friday.
Wow.
In the fall of 1968.
Because you were having to fight to get this.
Yeah, well, what happened is that we started talking about how we wanted to have a house. We wanted to have a place where we could go and have like at least a little bit of relief from the all-whiteness that we were experiencing everywhere else on that campus. We started talking with the administration about it. We were talking with the dean of students. At a certain point, we said, okay, we're not getting anywhere with this. It's like one roadblock after another. And so at a certain point in the late that year, we decided we're sitting in the administration building. And of course, I participated. And it was a very ladylike sit-in. We did not block people from their offices. We wanted to be a silent witness, basically a silent witness of like, we're tired of this now.
Yeah.
We're sitting here in your space. There were no Black adults to speak of on campus. There was one Black teacher, one Black instructor. Wow. So, you go into the administration building, everybody in the administration building is white too.
Yeah.
I was teaching myself African-American literature at that point.
Even though there was no outlet to take those kinds of classes.
Oh, no, it was all independent studies. Yeah. But I was committed, because it wasn't being taught. My big dream was to be a writer, but also to travel. They were very connected to each other. Yeah. James Baldwin was my idol. He was over in Paris, So I actually thought I was going to have to be an expatriate to Paris, which is that's not the worst thing that could happen.
It's like romantic, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. But then the women's movement came along and I didn't have to go. But anyway, I thought, well, let me apply to an airline. And maybe I'll get to travel that way because, of course, I don't have the money. Yeah. And so I went to Pan American, and it was just like this young white man, not much older than I. He might have been in his mid-20s, late 20s. And I, as I said, was a senior in college. And so it's just the two of us talking. Then he gives me a written test, and I ace it.
Of course.
And so this guy's looking at me. Yeah. Like he's looking at me like his eyes are rolling back in his head. When that kind of thing happens, certain kinds of people don't understand what they just experienced. Yeah. It's like, how does somebody who looks like that, she's not white and she's not male and she just aces tests. They don't have a way of understanding. No, they don't. No, they don't. Because the thing is, of all the stereotypes.
Yeah. I mean, they don't have another framework. Yeah.
And so then I'm talking to him. So he's impressed by the test.
Maybe that changed his life also, by the way.
Who knows? Who knows? But the thing is, so we're talking, and I said, and who knows why I knew to say this. I said, and what are the possibilities for advancement and going into management? And you know what he said? He said, oh, there wouldn't be any. And I said, what do you mean? He said, because we don't do that with women. And I was like, okay. So long. I'm going to grad school.
Oh, good.
So good long. You. I mean, can you imagine that? I mean, he was just out there with it. Yeah. It was 1969.
I mean, it was truly.
He said, I said, what are the possibilities for management? He said, oh, there aren't any.
None.
I said, okay. So when I go to grad school, same year I finished college, I wanted to get my own electric typewriter. I couldn't get a typewriter because they wouldn't give me credit because I wasn't married to anybody. So I'm a grad student at the University of Pittsburgh.
Unable to get a typewriter.
Exactly.
What did you do?
I asked my aunt.
Okay.
I asked my aunt, who had great credit and who prided herself on how well she managed financially on very little. And I asked, would you charge this typewriter for me from JCPenney? And then I'll pay you. And that's how I got my typewriter. Okay. I mean, how absurd is that?
Really absurd.
What is really sad, and thank God it's not tragic, is that when I went to grad school at the University of Pittsburgh, I thought, because of experiences that I had there, that I would never be politically active again. Because there was a Black Studies program there, one of the first in the country. It was very nationalist. And that meant, women walk 3 steps or 7 steps behind, that your job was to have babies for the nation, and that men were the sun, and that women were the moon, and that men led everything, led organizations, the family, and none of it was I buying.
Barbara would take the next few years off from politics as she worked on getting her degrees. But luckily, in 1974, she found a new political home at the first regional conference of the National Black Feminist Organization, also known as NBFO.
There were hundreds of people there, and they had come from all over the country. But we were encouraged to start chapters of the National Black Feminist Organization in the cities and towns where we lived. And so while we were at that conference, people from Boston got together in a stairwell. We were at Riverside Church, as I remember, in New York City, and we got together in a stairwell and we started planning. And that's kind of the origins of the Combahee River Collective. A lot more people know about the collective now because of the fact that we wrote a statement in 1977. I think it came out or was available maybe a year or two later in a book that is titled Capitalist Patriarchy and the Case for Socialist Feminism. That was edited by Zila Eisenstein. That's why we wrote the Combahee River Collective Statement. I don't know if she had not asked us to write something for her book, and that was her first book, I don't know that we ever would have done the statement, which is really kind of amazing.
So going to the NBFO conference, can you sort of explain the landscape at the time as far as like meetings like that and organizing like that? Was that something that you'd ever experienced before? Like, what was it like walking into that kind of community for the first time?
There was nothing like that.
Yeah.
One of the things that really needs to be understood now, as we finish the first quarter of the 21st century, what needs to be understood is that to be a Black feminist in the 20th century, the latter part of the 20th century, during the second wave, was really, really a bold position to take. There was no comparable organization of any other type. There was a long-time organization, the National Council of Negro Women, that had probably been started in the early 1900s. There were associations of Black women's clubs. There was a Black women's club movement that started probably late 19th century into the early 20th century. Their purpose was civil rights, of course. There were Black women's suffrage clubs. So you might say, well, those were feminist clubs too, or feminist organizations. But they were not doing what NBFO was doing and then what the Combahee River Collective eventually ended up doing. Going to the National Black Feminist Organization Conference, as I said, that was November of 1973. It was like nothing that we had ever experienced. The level of exhilaration, the level of excitement was through the roof.
Yeah.
Some of the people who were there are well-known names. June Jordan, Alice Walker, Shirley Chisholm, of course, a well-known name, but this was 73.
Right.
Eleanor Holmes Norton, who's a member of Congress, a non-voting member of Congress from Washington, D.C. Those were some of the kinds of people who were there, and then the hundreds of us who had come from all over. One of the things about my experience, unlike some other Black feminist experiences, is that I came into feminism through Black feminism, in the sense that I was never a part of a predominantly white women's political organization and then experiencing some of the negative dynamics that are kind of inherent in that during that historical period. Now, I just want to go back and say, I'm not saying that relationships and work across identity differences are inherently negative. That's not what I just said. What I said is that in the early 1970s, still the civil rights era, an era of Black nationalism and Black power, an era of the second wave beginning to blossom. The Combahee River Collective Statement broke a lot of ground in how do we work across differences. But as I said, just starting out like in the 60s, let's say, in the 1960s, moving into the second wave, the period of the second wave, relationships between women of different groups, particularly between Black and white women and other women of color, they were pretty fraught. Yeah. And my sister, Beverly, who lived in New York at that time and who found out about the conference because she worked at Ms. Magazine. Right. And I went from teaching African-American literature in Boston. That's what I was doing in the fall of 1973. I was teaching at Emerson College and teaching my very first course on Black women's literature in the fall of 73. I went from that to the National Black Feminist Organization to, starting a chapter to Combahee. Yeah. It's all kind of seamless.
So after this conference, you then start the Boston chapter of the NBFO.
A small group of us started.
And was that majority queer women?
No, not to my recollection. Okay. And in fact, when I went to the NBFO conference, I did not identify as a lesbian.
Okay.
I didn't come out until the following year. When I say I came out, what I mean is that a whole year later, probably November/December of 1974, I got together with a friend of mine from college who was a lesbian and who was one of the founders of Olivia Records. And I hear on your podcast.
Our sponsor.
I think the question is, do you know about Olivia? But of course, it started as a record company. And so I was in Washington. I'd taken a job at a major national newspaper. I was only there for about 6 months.
Yeah.
May until December. But toward the end of my time, I knew that this friend of mine from college was living there. I had all these lesbian feelings, and I never talked about them with anybody. And so I mumble, to her. I said, I think maybe, I might be a lesbian. And then I proceeded to go home and get the worst food poisoning I ever had in my life.
And you're like, God's striking me down.
Yes,
right now.
Exactly.
No.
But fortunately got through that. And then Demita Frazier had written to me that fall. This is fall of 74. And she had, in those days, you put your home address into a magazine and didn't think you were going to have any bad consequences as a result. You might have given it some thought, but you didn't think, it's going to be terrible. Ms. Magazine did a feature about the National Black Feminist Organization conference. And so what they did is that they listed some local contacts. And so I was the Boston local contact with my home address.
Yeah.
So Demita writes me a letter. She was saying, I'm really interested in being a part of NBFO. And so I wrote to her, I said, well, I'm in Washington now. I'll be coming back soon. We'll get together. So we started meeting when we got back. And that was my first kind of opportunity to be around Black lesbians of my age, who I thought were terrific.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't long before I was identifying.
Okay.
As a lesbian.
Demita is queer or lesbian.
Oh,
as well.
Yes. Okay. Absolutely.
So all you, your sister, and Demita are the three people that wrote the statement, right?
Yes. It's Demita and Beverly and I who wrote this statement. Okay. There were a lot of non-lesbian women involved in Combahee in the early days. Some of the most dynamic people who were involved were indeed lesbians. And I'm thinking particularly of Demita, who, we became close friends very early. So it was just really nice for me to say, these are people that I like. These are people who are doing wonderful things. These people are not scary.
And so I know there was a lot of interesting issues that you were working on at this time.
Right. What we started doing after I got back from Washington and then meeting Demita, we did consciousness raising. Black women's consciousness raising.
So can you explain consciousness raising groups? What does that look like? What exactly is that?
So the abbreviation is CR.
Okay.
And the thing is, there were CR groups everywhere in the United States during this period. It was a way of women finding each other and talking about the real conditions of their day-to-day lives that up until that point had seemed to be individualized problems or just individualized experiences. So you go to see your OBGYN, he talks to you like you're 10 years old or 3 years old. It's really rough, but you have to do it because it's for your health. I mean, if you're lucky, you have to do it. If you're lucky, you get to do it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the kinds of things that would happen in those appointments, just horrible, and some of them did border on sexual harassment. Some of them did border on that, but at the very least, what about warming up a speculum? Would that kill you?
Right.
What about having a woman assistant, whether they're a nurse, a physician's assistant, whoever they are, why not have a woman in the room so that you don't feel like you're exposed, splayed out on a table with this guy looking up your hoo-ha, It's just like, come on, And the thing is, all these things were happening and we all thought it was just me. It's only me, And then you have a consciousness raising group, like it could be like a group of friends who, maybe a bridge club, maybe, somebody you knew from your church or your synagogue, a food co-op. Maybe you're involved in recycling. Maybe you're a social worker and you have some friends who are like, what is this women's lib thing? Maybe let's get together to talk about it. But anyway, these CR groups sprung up all over the United States. Yeah. There were consciousness raising groups everywhere.
And it's women, like it started with
it's just grassroots, sort of
women-led.
Yeah, like, grassroots, no expertise. Yeah. But as I said, it was like, well, let's talk about work. Let's talk about housework. Let's talk about sex. Let's talk about, child care. Let's talk about, do you want to have children? Let's talk about, if you don't have children, how are you treated? Let's talk about, if you do have children, how are you treated? Let's talk about expectations, even around something as simple seeming as holidays. My friends and I, of course, I'm in the senior group now where, supposedly we get a little slack. But the thing is, like, we're all just laughing our little heads off last week about we don't have to cook anything, Yeah. We are not cooking anything,
And then what ended up ultimately happening where you decided, okay, my politics are actually not aligned enough with NBFO, right, and we need to split and start our own group.
One of the things that was happening is that it was very hard for NBFO to be the kind of organization that it wished to be because of lack of resources and funding. It wanted to be, I think, kind of parallel to the National Organization for Women. But unlike the National Organization for Women, it did not have the financial resources. And the thing is, we were not getting from the national exactly what we thought we would get and what we'd hoped to get at the very same time, because we had people in the group who had a lot of political experience. Demita had been involved with the Black Panthers. I had been involved in the movement to end the war in Vietnam. One of the people who was a part of Combahee at that time, she had been involved in the Black Left, including the Institute of the Black World. And she was a very well-educated Marxist. During that period, the women's movement was basically on the other side of the river. So if you were in Boston and you wanted to be in the women's movement for many years, you always had to go to Cambridge or Somerville. Combahee in some ways changed that at a certain point, because we said, why can't you all come over here? We have this wonderful new community settlement house called the Harriet Tubman House, by the way. And it was in the South End. And we started having meetings, particularly around the Hyde Amendment and in the Abortion Action Coalition at Harriet Tubman House. We were involved with lots of things that were going on. Kenneth Edelin had been arrested and prosecuted for manslaughter. He did a legal abortion. Abortion was legal.
Yeah.
And set by 73.
Doctor, right?
Yeah, a Black doctor, but he gets prosecuted for doing a legal abortion at Boston City Hospital. And so we were involved with that. We began to be involved in the Committee to End Sterilization Abuse.
Can you talk a little bit about what was going on with that?
With sterilization?
Yeah, like at that time.
If you look back to that period, which would be 50s, 60s, 70s, in the United States and in its colonies, including Puerto Rico, you will see that there was a disproportionate amount of sterilization of women of color, was indigenous women in the United States, Puerto Rican women in Puerto Rico, and Black women, often in the South, in different ways and motivations are different. Scenarios, not necessarily. It was all about eugenics, of course.
Right. And it's also the idea of like, and this is obviously so f***ed up, but that they're trying to control like welfare families, basically.
Well, if you look at the history of eugenics in the United States, it goes back to the early 1900s, if not the late 1800s. You will see that what they wanted to do is they wanted to get rid of people who were so-called unfit. So it was about disability, defining people based upon different capacities, physical and mental, defining them as being unacceptable. Yeah. And we're not going to have any more of these people. We'll sterilize the people who they would define as idiots or as morons. We'll sterilize them so they can't have children. And then, therefore, we'll never have any more babies born who have any kinds of disabilities. It was, well, I'll just say it like you did. It's f***ed up.
Yeah, it's
completely.
Really, it's like completely.
It was an incredible racist, genocidal agenda. Like, so it wasn't,
and always non-consensual or like often coerced.
Right.
Like,
Well, the thing is, by the mid 20th century, it might have been like, we don't want these welfare cheats. They have too many children.
But at the very least, that's just the framing of it at that point. I mean, it's rooted in all.
Right. No, but it goes back further to just some incredibly negative and really twisted and diabolical ways, of seeing the world.
And you were organizing and eventually got legislation passed banning it,
well,
right?
eventually, I don't know if it became federal legislation. I assumed that it did. We were the Committee to End Sterilization Abuse. And I think CARASA was abortion rights and sterilization. And these groups, worked together. In Puerto Rico, the level of sterilization was so high that people just referred to it as the operation. They just called it the operation in Spanish. And I think that it was about at least 20%, if not higher, maybe even 1/3 of women in Puerto Rico had been sterilized.
Oh my God. That's
in
so crazy.
The United States, sterilizing of Black women, Fannie Lou Hamer was one of the people who was sterilized. It was so prevalent in the Black Belt and in the Deep South, it was referred to as a Mississippi appendectomy, basically being sterilized. And the thing is, often this would happen in the context of giving birth. And so, the most challenging physical and emotional thing that a person does, a person who can become pregnant and bring a baby into the world, labor and delivery would be that. So when that happens, somebody thrust a form into this person's hand who's just gone through this. We want to sterilize you too, so that, you won't be back here again. If you don't sign this form, you're going to lose all your benefits. You will lose your benefits if you don't sign this now. Now, what if the person doesn't read or speak English? You just give them the form anyway. So people were being sterilized against their will, without their consent, and without even being given a form to sign in the language that they actually spoke. It was atrocious. It was atrocious. One of the things that we did in the Committee to End Sterilization Abuse, and we always, good radicals and good people who are doing really serious politics are always doing self-education and study. And so one of the things that we would often talk about was population control. Population control is an arm of eugenics. It's connected to eugenics. And it's like this perspective of there's not enough resources in the world. The way we solve these problems is to have fewer people, as opposed to having the people who are hoarding
distribution of resources.
Yeah, exactly. Who are hoarding all the money and all the gold and all the this and all the oil and all of that. Instead of saying, no, wait a minute. What about equal distribution of what people need, as opposed to you having it all? I mean, why do we have these billionaires?
I literally hate thinking about it.
Yes, and as I say, there's no such thing. There's no way a billionaire has earned that. You can steal. You can manipulate. You can exploit to be a billionaire, but you have not earned that money.
Well, this feels related to the politics of Combahee and being
that we're
anti-capitalist.
Socialist.
So
Black socialist feminists.
So can you pinpoint the unique politics of Combahee that set it apart from the NBFO, and also just what was so groundbreaking in general when the statement came out?
Well, there are a number of things that are unique and groundbreaking about Combahee. The fact that we're explicitly anti-capitalist is groundbreaking. I always say that the reason that the words of Combahee and the words of the statement live on is because it was written from a socialist perspective, a socialist, Black socialist feminist perspective. The other thing, and this is of course right with the subject matter of that we're talking about today, is that we included sexuality as a a system of oppression we opposed. We didn't even have a word for it back then. We talked about heterosexual oppression. What we meant was heterosexism and homophobia. Those words had not even been coined yet, but we put it right in there. Those two factors made the statement just like, wow, who are these people? Why are they saying these things? That was kind of new in the world, I believe. And the thing is, you can look at earlier work. There's some individual Black lesbian writers who had been publishing material, often poems and short stories, around the time that the statement came out. But again, there's a difference between writing about your experiences and your identity and drawing a line in the sand and saying, no, this is politics. It's just as wrong for you to oppress and discriminate against people based upon sexuality. And that would include not just women, but all queer people. It's just as wrong for you to do that as it is to oppress and discriminate around race.
And this was 77.
Yes,
right,
we wrote it in 77.
Yeah. Let's talk about identity politics in the statement. Is it true that this is like the first time that this term is being printed?
To
basically?
our knowledge. Yeah. Over the years, I have asked people, did you ever see it anywhere else? And I'm asking scholars this. I'm asking people who read and read deeply and do research. And no one has ever said to me, oh, yeah, it shows up in such and such a place. Now, with the internet, it's even more likely that perception is accurate. Because you can do a word search and you see what you find. By identity politics, I know you're going to ask me this, so I'll just leap ahead.
Yes, get into it.
What we meant is that Black women have a right to formulate our own political agendas. And we said that at a time when most people did not think that should be true. Black politics were what Black men, defined them to be. Feminist politics were what white women defined those politics to be. And we were saying, but we're both. And we also are looking at class, and we're also looking at sexual orientation or sexuality. And we have a right to come up with political agendas and strategies that fit and that work in relationship to who we are. And one of the things that people have took identity politics to mean is that there's some identities that are more equal than others, and that some people are more worthy and some groups are more worthy of respect than others. That is hardly what we meant. What we meant is that at this particular historical moment, which is the late 1970s, when Black women have virtually no institutions, very little visibility, almost no power, that we're just, in a traditional position in U.S. history at that point. We're still in a traditional position in U.S. history. Just because we had a person who was Black and South Asian who ran for president doesn't mean that every single thing has changed.
Right.
And look, she didn't win either.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
She didn't win either. And I think that race and gender had quite a bit to do with that. Not totally, because there's also her neoliberal politics and Gaza and genocide and etc. But we cannot underestimate, race and gender 100%. And sexism, misogyny, and white supremacy, and what happened with that most recent election. But certainly in 77, we're seen as like non-entities, just absolute non-entities who were assumed to be inferior in every single way. We were not allowed to have anything to say. We were seen as traitors to the race if we spoke out.
And when you say we, you mean Black women?
Yeah, Black political women who question male domination. That makes you a traitor to the race. If you think that violence against Black women is not a good thing, if you think that rape, sexual assault, battering are not good things, and murder too, if you speak out, then you're a traitor to the race. And the most signal example of that is the response to Alice Walker's The Color Purple. People were up in arms about it. And why? Because she actually writes very explicitly about what it's like to be in an abusive relationship and what happens when you decide, I'm not doing this anymore. And there is some kind of a relationship in that book. I would call it a lesbian relationship with Shug and Celie, not necessarily as explicit as, we might understand it to be, but it's definitely not a heterosexual relationship, and they were definitely in love with each other, right?
Yeah, so
that's quite enough, people in the Black community were up in arms, and there are people who are up in arms to this day at the idea of Black women having autonomy and having rights. They just can't really quite get with that, and that's really very pitiful, because why would we think that way within our group when outside of our group we're up against so much oppression? We should be able to say, oh no, within our group it's going to be about a freedom agenda. And that's what we meant. And we also believed very strongly in coalition.
Yeah.
We weren't saying that everybody else was unworthy of freedom. We said that if Black women are free, given all the factors of oppression that we face, that means everybody else would have to be, because it would all apply. Economic exploitation, if we get rid of it for a particular group of people, then that means there's a pathway toward that for everybody. If Black women fight capitalism and reorganize to have a caring economy, a just and equitable economy where everyone has the things that they need and deserve in order to basically live, that means everybody will get it.
Black women's issues, quote unquote, I mean, it's just everywhere. It's everything that affects Black people. It's everything that affects women.
I think that a lot of things have happened since then. Black feminism is more popular in some ways, but it's also it can sometimes be less well understood. Black feminism is not integrating into a burning house, as James Baldwin said. And Audrey said it another way: the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house. We have to have other visions, mutual aid. I love the slogan, we keep each other safe. We're going to need that now more than ever. You don't get safety out of a bureaucracy from the top down. You get safety because you're paying attention to what's going on. I'm looking to my left and to my right. And, like the best kind of fighting that we do politically is like in solidarity with people who are different from ourselves, who are in different circumstances than ourselves, but also fighting for rights that we all know that we have and deserve, deserve. I don't see the right wing operatives reading the Combahee River Collective Statement. I don't think they're doing that. I don't think they're doing that. I think that the concept of identity politics is obvious enough in some ways that other people could come to it. And as the politics arose, people said, oh, it seems like these people are concerned about their identities. And that's often something I think that particularly comes to rest with our queer and trans community.
Yeah, definitely.
They don't get that. And even within the Democratic Party following this most recent election, people are saying people don't care about bathrooms. People don't care about, who gets to play sports. What we care about is the working class. Who the hell do you think the working class is?
Right.
Some of the poorest people in our nation are trans women of color. Are they not working class? And they're being murdered wholesale. So talk to me about the working class. Doesn't make any sense.
Writing and sort of distributing statements was kind of a common thing
Yes.
then, right? How did it reach as many people as it has?
It was originally written for a book. Subsequently, we started Kitchen Table Women of Color Press a few years later. But in the meantime, I actually initiated the book, All the Women Are White, All the Blacks Are Men, But Some of Us Are Brave, which is a book that focuses on Black women's studies. First one ever published in the United States to focus on Black women's studies. It's in there. It was published in a lot of places. There was a point in the mid-1980s, the United Nations was having international women's conferences around the world. There was International Women's Year.
And this is when you were a delegate.
Yes.
It's such an interesting story.
It is a great story, because the interesting part is passing the sexual orientation plank at a government-sponsored conference with Phyllis Shapley,
But originally, like, you're trying to get elected as a delegate because the right was sort of
the white right wing in Boston, the South Boston Marshals, who were opposed to school busing. Yeah. And I lived in Boston all through the school busing crisis of the 1970s.
And they're like infiltrating these conferences.
Yeah, we had heard that they wanted to infiltrate. There were two nominating and electing conventions, one in Western Mass and one in Boston, and that these right-wing groups, particularly in our area, who were anti-busing, wanted to infiltrate these conventions so that they would send right-wing women to the government-sponsored International Women's Year Conference. And so we just ran as a tactic. We didn't think we were going to be elected. And sure enough, some of us got elected. And so we went. And one of the things that we did then was we created our own newspaper with basic feminist issues kind of explained, maybe like 10,000 copies of this newspaper, and literally were distributing them everywhere we could at the convention. We did do that.
And did it have anything about the statement in it? Is that part of this?
I'm not sure.
But it was
can't remember
your ideas and all of that.
Yeah, I can't remember. But what happened at the convention itself was that the question was the sexual orientation plank of the platform going to be voted affirmatively?
And what do you mean plank? Like what was
Well, the thing is, it was conducted pretty much like a conventional party convention. We had platform issues to vote on, and they were passed by the convention as a whole. But, they were passed by delegates.
So what was the sort of concept of this?
It basically said it's okay to be queer.
Okay.
That's basically what it was saying.
Yeah,
it's okay to be queer. It's okay to be a woman and be queer. It's okay, and that people who are should not be marginalized, brutalized, maimed, hurt, killed, imprisoned. The point is, was it okay to talk about sexual orientation at a time in the second wave when the women's movement was being accused of being nothing but a coven of lesbians, a coven of lesbians? This was a big question. And so what we did as Black women at the convention, we thought we got to get the Black women on board with this. And so we were meeting, Black lesbians were meeting. We put out, I think, we wrote a statement about why we wanted the straight Black women or the non-queer Black women at the convention to support the sexual orientation plank. And then the day that it was being voted on, we literally went around to delegations, state delegations. They were organized by state. We literally went from state delegation to state delegation and talked with the people sitting in their chairs with their state delegations about why we wanted them to support it. It was like retail politics, as they say.
Yeah.
And it passed.
It
was
cool.
incredible. I'm getting a chill just telling you.
What was the year again?
I believe it was 77.
I have it written down.
Everything that happened in 77, 78, 79, I get mixed up.
You know what I actually meant to ask you about before this is the retreats, because those started before the statement even came out, right?
No, they were
after?
Yeah, the retreat started in 77. The statement was dated April 77.
Okay.
The first retreat was, I think, in July.
So can you talk? I mean, they sound like these magical spaces.
And in the way they were sometimes.
And I think you had 7
They were
of
magical
them.
And sometimes kind of very difficult
for
an introvert like
me.
I'm
reading about like amazing home cooked meals.
Oh yeah, well the food. Yeah,
Audre Lorde's there.
Yeah. That was all happening.
That sounds like a space that would just be life-changing to be part of.
The purpose was to build Black feminism more solidly than we could just being in one city. I was on the Modern Language Association Commission on the Status of Women in the Profession, and I would go to all the MLA conventions. Dreadful, oh my God. Except that we used to have lesbian cultural festivals within the MLA.
Oh.
We had lesbian cultural festivals because wherever we went, the MLA Commission on the Status of Women was funded. And that meant that we could invite our favorite writers to come and do things at MLA. So we would have Adrienne Rich and Audre Lorde, and we would have Pat Parker, and we would have Judy Grahn, and we would have these incredible cultural events within the MLA. So that was happening. But I was at this MLA then in 77. I had just written Toward a Black Feminist Criticism. I think I'd met Audrey by that time, but there was something about, being at that convention and, like having whatever lesbian feminist cultural festival that we were having. Like, I'm looking at all of this and experiencing all this. And I said, oh, it's just such a shame that I'm always coming back to Boston and telling people about all the wonderful things that I just experienced and all the wonderful people that I just got to meet and et cetera. And I said, you know what? We should just all get together, bring everybody together. And that's how, we started having these retreats. We had 7 of them, and we had them up and down the East Coast. People came from as far away as California and Chicago. They were small, and they were held in homes, not in, we never had one in an institutional setting. And the food was to die for.
And so everyone would stay at these houses.
And at other people's houses.
Okay, in the area.
Yeah, you'd find houses for people in the community. Lots of dynamics, much Black lesbian soap opera.
Yeah, so how lesbian was it?
It was quite lesbian.
Yeah. Not exclusively, but
not
like
exclusively,
mostly.
but it was very lesbian.
And so was there romance and
Oh,
stuff?
lots.
Oh my gosh.
There's not just romance. Let's just be honest. There was sex happening, yes. But
at the retreat.
Yes, but as an introvert,
You didn't have sex on these retreats.
Not to my recollection. And I was
as far as I know.
And I was as far as I know. That's pretty funny. Not really into the substances. But the thing is, no, I did not. But there were things happening. I often wonder, since my aunt died before I came out, my grandmother outlived my aunt and my mother. My uncle died in 2001. So he lived far longer than his 2 sisters did. And he did know my story. And he was cool about it. Oh. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
He was cool about it. And like one of the things that helped was that I was an author. This lesbian person, whatever, but I was an author. Mm-hmm. And so once I was at home in Cleveland, I think it was kind of a holiday party or something like that. And he was very involved in the church he went to. It was a different church, but definitely a Black Baptist church. They were having a party and he was introducing me to people. And he said, this is my niece, Barbara. She's an author. Mm. And I mean, are there any more words that can melt your heart? And the reason it was so wonderful to me, of course, he said it with great pride.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's also not a writer, but an author.
Yeah.
Because an author has books.
Right. An author has books.
Anybody can be described as a writer.
Yeah.
But it was nice. And then I had another family member who I always call Aunt Iris, because we never would call anybody older than us by a first name. So my mother's cousins, they were aunts. So anyway, one of my uncle's sisters-in-law I became quite close to. That was Aunt Iris. And Aunt Iris went with me to Oberlin College once when I was talking to the Black queer organization there. And they were asking her, so like, how did the family feel when Barbara came out? And I was like, eek!
Oh my God. We don't talk about this.
But she was completely cool about it.
What did she say?
She said, well, my uncle's name was Bill. She says, well, Bill, he had to, think about it, but he definitely accepts Barbara. And I was just like, oh God, this is all too good. I have to think then, I think my aunt would have been cool.
Of course
my aunt
she would
LaRue.
have been.
My grandmother, nope. She wasn't cool about anything. Yeah.
But Aunt LaRue was cool about everything.
She was cool about almost everything. And then if we did something, I'll never forget, like the one day that my grandmother said something about something my sister and I had done. Mm-hmm. It's always a we when I'm talking about childhood.
Yeah.
But the thing is that I'd done something that my grandmother thought was really great. And you know what she said? She said, not every little girl could have done what you did.
Oh, wow.
Not every little girl.
And that stuck with you, of course.
I've never forgotten.
Yeah.
Not every little girl could have done what you did.
You're special.
And then on the other days, I was chopped liver. Have you asked all your questions at midnight? Here we are.
I have one sort of concluding question for you, which is if you feel like you have queer community now, currently, and where you find it. No?
That's one of the things that I learned, as I got to be like middle-aged and older. You can't have everything. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things about my life now, which is a pretty wonderful life, I think. You see how I'm living, with the movie theater and the swimming
you're
pool.
Living nice.
I don't have enough lesbian or queer friends or gay friends who live here physically.
Right.
In the Capital District. I have a lot of heterosexual friends at this point. And I have a really close friend who is a lesbian, Sheila Sable, and I met when she was an intern for Kitchen Table in the late 80s. She was in college. She's now 60.
Your publishing company formed with Audre Lorde.
Yes.
Publishing all women of color works.
Wherever they might be.
We didn't talk about that much, but it's fine.
Yes. And we talk about how we don't have enough lesbian friends.
Yeah.
And we fantasize about being friends with the people in the movies, like Ariana and and Cynthia.
Oh, I didn't know you were fantasizing about that too.
We went to see the movie last week.
Oh my God, we're obsessed.
And Sheila had the nerve to ask me. I wore a green top when I did this conversation with Bill Ayers on Thursday. I wore a green top. Green is my favorite color. It's been my favorite color forever. My campaign literature was green. Everybody else goes with red, white, and blue. Oh, please.
No, thank you.
No, I had green. It's not so obvious around here, but I have green things in my closet. So I wear green.
You're an alphaba.
Yeah. Well, whatever. But I wore this green top.
Yeah.
And she had the nerve to ask me, did you wear that as a tribute to Alphaba? I said, I have been wearing green since before Alphaba was born. Although I think she's older than I am. I just feel like, don't be trying to act like that I got into green. But I don't mind. But as I said, we just don't have enough community here. And we fantasize about, like Io from, what is the name of the show about the Chicago restaurant?
Oh, the bear.
I wrote to Sheila, I said, why can't we be friends with these people? And there's Hannah from Hacks. And they're all friends with each other.
Wait, I feel like if you reached out, you could be friends with them.
I don't know. But the thing is, like, we feel like we should be friends with them. But, but the thing is, we're so old, I mean, Sheila feels
I bet
old.
Cynthia would be friends with you in a heartbeat.
Well, I don't know. You can't have everything.
Thank you for listening to Cruising. If you like this episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star review. It really helps others discover our podcast. Cruising is produced by a small but mighty team of 3 queer women, Rachel Karp, Jen McGinnity, and me, your host and editor, Sarah Gabrielli. Our theme song is by Joey Freeman. Thank you to Barbara Smith for inviting us into her home and sharing her story. You can find us on social media at CruisingPod and on the web at www.cruisingpod.com. Support us at buymeacoffee.com/cruisingpod. But Barbara, you said that when we were coming up here that you're the only white person in this. I mean,
I'm the only white person in this building. That's so funny.
No misgendering,
That's so funny. I love that because the thing.
Cut that.
Do you think if I was the only white person in this building that it would be as quiet as it is? No, we would be hearing some great music.
We would have some sound.
There'd be some great music coming through these walls.
Retake.